Hello, hardware creators and innovators. Welcome to this Q&A session where I'm going to be answering various questions about developing, manufacturing, and ultimately selling a new electronic product. So although this isn't live, I'm obviously not live streaming it, although it's live for me right now, but it's not live for you. But I'm treating this video kind of like it's live. So I'm going to be doing almost no editing, except maybe if I have to get up to go to the bathroom, I'll cut that out so you don't have to wait around. But otherwise, it's going to be minimal editing. So I wanted this to have a similar feel as a live video or live streaming. So just you kind of get to know me a little bit better. Eventually, I'll get to know you better, hopefully. And it just allows us to kind of, the goal is just we're going to hang out and I'm going to be answering various questions. So some of the questions I'm going to be answering are questions that come from members inside my Hardware Academy program. And then other questions I'll be answering are those questions that are asked in like my various YouTube comments. For any questions asked by my Academy members, I just want to make it clear that I'm only going to be providing their first name and not sharing any proprietary details. And that's not going to really take away from the questions. Most of the questions we're going to be looking at don't really include any proprietary details. So I'm not really sharing anything secret from these members. Well, for those of you that don't know me, my name is John Teal. I'm an electronics engineer and an entrepreneur. I was originally a microchip designer for Texas Instruments. I did that for about 10 years. And then I was a full-time remote consultant for them for maybe about 4 more years. I designed dozens of really successful microchips that are used in all kinds of products from Apple and Intel and Samsung. So I did that for about 14 years total. I also developed and brought my own hardware product to market, which was sold in hundreds of retail stores. And then for the past about 6 to 7 years, I've been focusing entirely on helping other entrepreneurs develop and bring their own electronic products to market. Okay, so I've got my hot coffee all ready to go, and I'm excited to get into answering some questions. It only took me about 30 years to learn to love coffee. I spent most of my life hating coffee and not understanding how anyone could love it. And now it's like the first thing that hits my lips when I wake up in the morning. So let me take a sip of coffee and then we'll get started. Okay, so let me get to the first question here. So this first question comes from a Hardware Academy member named Steve. And Steve asks, we are looking into purchasing circuit design and PCB layout software. Some articles online point to Altium Designer, which is expensive, being the best and most powerful. I'm leaning more towards Eagle, as this will be our first venture into circuit design and PCB creation. We are not sure how much we will be using this software past this one project. Is Altium that much more powerful than Eagle that makes it worth the extra cost? As a professional, do you see Eagle as almost a hobbyist tool? Any help on this matter would be greatly appreciated. Okay, so this is obviously a hotly debated topic, is various software packages. So Steve's asking specifically about Altium and Eagle, which I'm going to address, but I'll also mention some other softwares, programs for doing the same thing. And there are literally dozens of PCB design software packages out there. First of all, Altium is way overpriced and way overkill for most projects, unless you need to collaborate with other engineers. So if you're going to be working with a large team of engineers, then Altium is by far going to be your best option. Mainly just because it's the most standard, probably the most popular, especially if you're working with design firms. Altium is almost always the tool that they're going to use. So if you need to work with other engineers, then you're probably going to want to use Altium. Eagle, which is now part of Fusion 360, which also includes 3D modeling software, is honestly the worst, most frustrating software that I've probably ever used. And I've used a lot of software in my life. It has an absolutely horrible user interface, and it's extremely non-intuitive. You're not going to just open up Eagle for the first time and start designing your circuit. It's going to feel really awkward. You're going to have to get used to their user interface, and you're going to be honestly wasting a lot of time just learning the software. And same is true with Altium, although they have a much better user interface than Eagle. Both are really complicated software with a lot of features, and the more powerful the software, the more features it has, also usually means the higher the learning curve to use that software properly. And Eagle is definitely not just for hobbyists. Eagle is actually, it's very professional software. It's ranked up there. You'll see it listed with Altium. It's been around for long, long time. So it's definitely not just for hobbyists. In fact, I would say that there are other packages that would be more appropriate for a hobbyist. Eagle other than its non-intuitive factor, if you're going to have to work with other engineers, this could be a viable choice for you because it is very popular and standardly used, especially by design firms, similar to the way Altium are. But both Altium and Eagle have huge learning curves, so just prepare yourself for that. Since Steve, who asked the question, is interested in really just his one project, which I suspect a lot of that you may be in this same boat as well, that you only have to do the one project, although I never encourage entrepreneurs to focus on just one product. You can't be a huge success with one product. Usually you have to constantly be adding new products or new versions of your product. But you're still going to be working on one product for quite a long time, versus if you're, say, a professional engineer who's working on lots of different projects, then it's a totally different set of criteria for choosing the software. So since Steve is already is only doing one project, or he's focused on one project, then I would not really recommend Altium or Eagle unless you already have experience with those. So if you come from a professional design career and you used Altium at your employer, then it may make sense, if you can afford it, to use that for your design for your one project. But for most entrepreneurs, most people, I would suggest either KiCad or KiCad, however how you want to say it, or DipTrace. So KiCad is free. It's open source software that's sufficient for most projects. I mean, come on, you can't beat the price of free. And I know quite a few people that are using KiCad, that it's sufficient for most projects. DipTrace is a paid software, although they do have a free option. And even though it's paid, it's drastically more affordable than Altium or Eagle. And they do have various levels. So let's say if your board is only 2 layers, maybe 300 pins or something, then they have like an entry level version. And then if you want to go up to 4 layers and say 500 pins, there's the next version. So you're not paying for more than you need, and you can just upgrade as you need. Let's say you think you can do it in 4 layers and you end up needing 6, then you can always upgrade. It just allows you to start using DipTrace without without having to pay for the most expensive version. So it's got a good upgrade path. And they do have a 30-day trial on the full version, so you can also start with that as well. So with DipTrace, the beauty of DipTrace is you can really focus on your design instead of how to use the software. And literally within minutes, you can begin designing a circuit in DipTrace. It's very intuitive. I can almost guarantee that if you have a decent amount of software experience, that you can open up DipTrace and at least place a couple components and connect them up within just a few minutes without having to spend hours reading instructions. So KiCad and DipTrace aren't as sophisticated as Altium or Eagle, but they're more than capable for most projects. And they're so much more affordable than either of them and so much easier to use. And KiCad is the cheapest because it's free, and it's good software, but DipTrace is, I think, of all the software out there for PCB design. And this is not just my opinion. I think a lot of people that have used DipTrace, even though it's not as commonly known as some of these others, anyone that's used it just raves about the user interface and how intuitive it is to use. And so there are lots of other software packages out there but I've not personally used them, so I'm not going to comment on them. I think between one of these four, you're going to be able to find what you need. If you've got a really complicated project or you've got experience in Altium, or you just have thousands of dollars that you want to get rid of, then I would suggest Altium. But otherwise, I would probably look at KiCad or DipTrace. And one big heads up with PCB design software is I've mentioned there are dozens of different packages. Well, the problem is there are dozens, but none of them are compatible with each other. So if you start a design in, let's just say DipTrace, then you're pretty much going to be stuck, or not, I'm not going to say stuck with it, but you're not going to be able to switch to different software in the future if you decided without pretty much redesigning it. Yeah, you can import designs and things like that, but you lose so much information, and it really causes a lot of headaches. And I found it's just, in most cases, it's best to just restart from scratch. The one, so there's no universal format for PCB design software. There are file formats that you've probably heard of called Gerber files, which are output files that you would output of your PCB once it's done, and that's what you send to the manufacturer to manufacture your board. So any PCB design software I feel like there's a couple free ones that are tied to specific PCB manufacturers, but most of them, almost all of them, you can output Gerber files. And you can import Gerber files. So you could take a PCB layout from one and import it into another, but you're going to lose the hierarchy. You don't have the schematic that you can run verification against. So it's definitely going to be problematic. So give this some thought up ahead of time. Make sure that what you start with is what you're going to stick with. This tends to be more of an issue for those that end up wanting to outsource the PCB design. So let's say you outsource it to one engineer and he starts the design in KiCad, but you end up not being happy with that designer, or he was a freelancer and he got a full-time job or whatever and he disappears. Then that's going to be problematic for you, because you're going to have to find another engineer that uses the same software, which, once again, if it's Altium, that becomes a little bit easier. But if you're using one of the more obscure packages, then that becomes a little bit more of an issue if you have to transition from one designer to another. So if you're outsourcing the development, then you're not paying for the PCB design software. So if you're outsourcing, I would probably lean toward someone that uses Altium, just because that will make it much easier to find someone else in the future to finish their design. And it is, I would say 9 out of 10 people that I work with that outsource product development, not 9 out of 10, probably 6 out of 10, I would say. It's a majority. It's over half, I think. I haven't taken concrete data on this, but just from my experience, that most of the time you end up having to switch engineers at some point. It's unless it's a full-time employee, odds are they're going to disappear at some point, or you're not going to be happy with their work and want to switch engineers. So just be careful you don't lock yourself into one specific design software that's not very commonly used, especially if you're outsourcing it. Okay, I hope that answered Steve's question. I need a drink of coffee now to coat my throat. Okay, let's move on to the next question. So this question comes from Paul, who asks, I suspect that there are many people like me who have a technical background and some domain knowledge who are capable of overcoming design, development, and production hurdles, but struggle to communicate the benefits of their product to a skeptical mass market. I'd be grateful for any ideas about where to find good people who have a good track record in getting the first few thousand sales for a new product so I can avoid having a warehouse full of unsold inventory? Okay, this is a fantastic question, and I'm glad that Paul's giving this a lot of thought and asking about this before he gets too far along. Okay, so let's see here. Yep. Okay. So I'm gonna break this down into two parts. He mainly is asking, essentially how to outsource marketing and sales, but he's asking on how to do that to avoid having a warehouse full of unsold inventory. So I'm gonna tackle the last part of that question first, the how to make sure you don't end up with a warehouse full of unsold inventory. Well, there's only one surefire way of avoiding having a warehouse full of unsold inventory, and that is to not order inventory until you actually have orders in hand. It's simple. I know it's simple, but it's challenging to implement. And simple, in most cases, doesn't necessarily mean easy. I mean, first of all, it's really hard to sell a product under any circumstances. Sales is always hard, but especially trying to sell a product that isn't available yet, that becomes just an extra layer of challenge that you have to deal with. And this is especially a challenge for hardware because it's a lot more work to get something that's ready to sell. So, for example, retailers, if you're planning on selling your product through retailers primarily, or starting that way, or eventually, they're not going to likely want to place an order if you tell them it's going to be 60 days, for example, before you can deliver that order. And I'm coming up with this 60 days because that's, say, 30 days for the manufacturing, and then 30 days to ship the order from, assuming you're doing manufacturing in China or Asia, then 30 days to ship that order by sea cargo. So probably 60 days, and that's assuming obviously that you've got manufacturing already set up and running. You're not gonna go from prototype to an order being shipped within that type of time period. And you can reduce that time if you're doing production, or at least maybe say the final parts of production, like assembly. If you're doing that domestically, then you can cut that lead time down, and that can just make it a little more feasible. Although it's still always a challenge. It's like most retailers, unless they're really excited about your product and really vested in it, they're probably not going to place an order before you have it available. That's not always the case. For my own product, I ended up getting a rather large order from Home Depot, and they were going to give me, it's been years ago, so I don't remember the exact timeline, but it was like 30 days, I think they were okay with. But I just couldn't, I couldn't do it in 30 days. So I had to actually turn down that purchase order because I couldn't ship the product. I couldn't manufacture it and get it to them within that time period. And that I was doing all my manufacturing in China, so I had the shipping time also that was that added onto that. Whereas if you're selling online, then, which is how I think probably you're most likely to start, is through online sales. It's really, you want to get pre-sales. So you want to pre-sell the product, basically get orders before you manufacture it. But pre-selling is really difficult to a cold audience. So if you have a warm audience, then you can actually get people to give you money before the product is ready. I mean, that's kind of what crowdfunding is, for instance. But you can also just do this natively on your own site if you have a warm audience. You can't do this with a cold audience, because pre-selling a product, if you're asking someone for money and you tell them it's going to be 6 months or a year or whatever in the future before you ship it, that requires a high level of trust, and you're not going to have that with a cold audience. So you need a warm audience of people who already have some level of trust for you. So this is why I'm going to stress this point right now. This is why you need to build your audience as soon as possible, and also build trust with that audience. And I always recommend that you start your audience building as soon as you're serious and you've decided to go forward with this project. That you might as well, because building an audience is slow. I mean, everything in this process takes time and is a long-term game, but building an audience also takes a lot of time. So just make sure you start much earlier than what you think. So I would do it simultaneously as you develop your product, and you can you can begin building that trust up with that audience. So you can't just build an audience and then never talk to them, but keep them involved in your development, and keep them updated on what's going on, and then that will just build some trust with them. And then once you do have it ready to pre-sell it, then you've got this warm audience that trust you enough and have heard about the product and feel vested in the product, that they're going to want to, they're going to be a lot more likely to buy. And so those are the mainly you get orders before you make the product. That's the surefire way to prevent having a warehouse full of unsold inventory. The other suggestion is always begin with the smallest order size. Don't ever purchase more than what you need for reduced pricing. I know it's really tempting when people start off, you're so confident, and I'm speaking from experience because I was the same way. You're so confident that this is going to sell. I mean, you're willing to put a mortgage, take a loan against your house. You're so sure that this is going to sell, and you want to make money right away. So it's common they'll look and think, gosh, if I make 1,000 units, I'm going to pay $10 for each one, and I'm not going to make any money. But if I buy 10,000, then they're only going to cost me $5, and I can make so much more money. Don't think that way. Don't think about profit in the beginning. Don't focus on profit. Instead, you need to. These beginning sales is not about making profit. It's about proving the product, proving that it will solve the intended solution, and more importantly, proving that people will buy the product. The profit can come later. You just need to make sure that that eventually you can make profit. I mean, you don't want to be in a situation where you're selling a $100 product and you can't ever manufacture it for less than $90. That's not enough profit margin. So you need to think in the future that once you are making high volume production, that you can then make a profit. But in the beginning, don't focus on making a profit. Focus on validating that your product will sell while minimizing your financial risk. I can't stress this enough. This is why you need to start with small orders, or better yet, get orders in hand before you purchase inventory, all mainly to lower your financial risk. Okay, so that's the first part on how to avoid having a warehouse full of inventory that you can't sell. The second part of Paul's question that I'm going to tackle now is outsourcing marketing and sales. And the simple answer is, and a lot of you, especially if you're technical, are probably not going to want to hear this, but in most cases, you are the best person to do the sales and marketing. Because if you're not involved in the sales and the marketing and interacting with customers, then it's difficult, if not impossible, for you to understand the needs of your customers. So as an introvert myself, I totally get it. And technical people, they tend to want to focus on the technical and avoid the customer at all costs. But that's definitely something you do not want to do. You need to be involved, because I guarantee most of the assumptions that you're making about what the customer wants aren't going to be totally accurate. And you're not going to know that if you don't interact with them. And so that's why I think initially you need to be the one to do the sales and marketing. And I would, that's why I would never really recommend that you outsource either of these, at least initially. Later, you can bring on independent sales reps if you're selling through retailers. And that's what I did for my own product. I started sales and marketing myself. Then I eventually brought on a independent sales rep who became my lead sales rep. And then with his help, then we expanded and we built up a team of about 20 independent sales reps that were selling my product. So I'm not saying you have to do everything forever, but in the beginning, you need to be the one to do it. So you can incorporate any feedback that you're hearing. And then that way it will make sure that you develop a product that will actually succeed. And so especially if you're technical, I think a lot of people are afraid to talk to customers and are afraid of sales and marketing, but engineers in particular, engineers are known to not like marketing and sales. And, that's big business, big corporations, there's always conflict between the engineering or design department and marketing, and they don't like each other, et cetera. You can't look at it that way. To succeed with your company or your product, you're going to have to embrace marketing. So if you have no interest in learning about sales and marketing, which I encourage you to give it a try. I'm an engineer. I was born an engineer, basically. So I'm an engineer, very introverted, and I still to this day, I don't like sales. I'm not going to lie, I don't like sales, but marketing, I do now enjoy. It's I don't know, it's very similar to engineering in a lot of ways. You're trying to figure out this puzzle of, what resonates with people. So give it a try. But if you have no interest in learning about sales and marketing, then your best option, I think, is going to find a co-founder. It's not something you want to outsource. You need to have someone that's as excited about your product as what you are. And in most cases, the only way to do that is with a co-founder. So that's what I would recommend if you absolutely do not want to do any of the marketing or anything like that. So, regardless of what it is, whether it's the technical aspects, your design, your sales, your marketing, you can outsource parts of it. I'm not saying that you have to do everything yourself. You can outsource parts of it, but you have to manage it. You can't just pass off sales and marketing to some expensive PR firm and think, okay, well, I can just focus on my hardware now and I don't have to think about sales and marketing. That is a recipe for failure. They don't know what's going to work either. So you're going to be paying them a lot of money to experiment and figure out what actually works. And so that's typically a waste of money. Now, once you have gotten far enough along that you figured out the marketing, you figured out your messaging, you figure out your demographic, you've got the product just right, it's meeting what customers are wanting, then you could look into later outsourcing it. So once you've figured it out, then you can pass it along to a larger firm to help you scale up that marketing. But you need to figure out the core marketing that works, and don't pass that off. That's so important. You really need to understand the customer, and you need to understand your marketing messaging and what resonates. And I can't stress enough how hard that is to find your marketing messaging that resonates. So it's something, I deal with predictable designs. I'm always trying to fine tune the marketing message to, just convey what I want to convey and to people. So just keep that in mind. And I just want to say that, I've mentioned a few times I'm an introvert, but it's like, just as an example, we lived in a small town in Alaska. And then later we lived there for a couple of years. Then we moved to a small town in Hawaii. And okay, I was able to do sales and marketing from there. If I'm living in a small town in Alaska and Hawaii, I'm obviously not extremely extroverted, salesy kind of person. And if I can do it, and especially from these remote locations, then I know you can as well. So you're going to have to probably take yourself outside your comfort zone. But I encourage you to learn to love marketing. It will be one of the best things for your business if you can just learn to embrace it and love it. And ultimately, my last comment on this question is you need to build an audience now And then that way you won't run into these issues. You won't have to worry about, how am I going to sell my first few thousand units or whatever, because you've already got this audience that's excited, that knows about your product, and they're ready to buy it whenever you have the product ready. So that's my main suggestion, is just start building that audience earlier than what you think. Okay, so that is Paul's question. That was a great question. Thank you so much, Paul, for asking that. Okay, let's look at the next question. And this question comes from Chris. And Chris asks, my question to you is, when and how do you find a worthy technical partner? The closer I get to completion, the more specific and technical the required skills, as well as having a broader scope. 2 months ago, I stopped multitasking and I focused on one area at a time: cloud architecture, hardware design, or software design. Each requires full attention, and hardware design is my weakest point. Now I feel like this is taking forever and I can't stand it. I have had plenty of help through subcontracting out bits and pieces, but in the end, I need someone else who cares as much as me. Where can I find engineers that may be interested in partnering? At what stage in development will people take me seriously? Also, what types of terms should I offer to a co-founder? Okay. So let me start off by just commenting on his comment that it's taking so long and he can't stand it. Being impatient, I think, is an inherent trait of entrepreneurs. And almost all entrepreneurs want things to move faster. But in reality, everything takes longer than what you think it's going to take. So let me share a little personal story from my own product and the process of getting it developed. My product had a lot of mechanical aspects, so I needed to hire a mechanical engineer. The first engineer I hired was recommended to me from some random prototype shop. So I hired the guy. It was quite expensive. I hired him, and things got started off okay, but it wasn't working. Things weren't moving along as fast as I wanted it. I mean, he would send me a design to review, and literally as soon as I'd see that email come in, man, I'm in there like analyzing it, making a list of all the specific changes I wanted. And usually within a few hours, I'd send it back and I'm like, okay, make these changes. I'm ready to get the update. And it would be days later, sometimes a week or more later. And it just got really frustrating for me, to the point where at some point where this mechanical engineer ended up getting really quite nasty with me, and not quite yelling, but it was close. It's essentially telling me that I need to, freaking calm down and quit pushing him so hard and to be more patient, and, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, I knew instantly this was not an engineer I was going to work with any further. So I terminated that relationship, moved on to another engineer. And this engineer had his own project he was working on. He was also an entrepreneur on the side. He was working on his own project. And mine, once again, got the lowest priority. It was always, he's always telling me, oh, well, I couldn't work on yours because I was doing this on my project. And that became really annoying. So eventually I'm like, okay, screw this. I'm going to teach myself how to do it. So that's what I did. I spent a couple months learning 3D modeling and studying injection molding and all the requirements for that. And I just ended up designing my own product and the mechanical aspect. And it was, oh my gosh, it was so much quicker because I was able to just iterate. Ultimately, no one's going to work as fast as the founder if they have the skills to do it, because no one's more motivated than you are for your own product. But in the end, and I'm not necessarily one to talk, but because I'm naturally not a very patient person. Although being a dad has forced me to, you learn to gain a lot of patience when you have children. But in general, I'm not very patient. I want things to move fast. I move fast. I make decisions fast. I tend to do things quickly and efficiently. So I get frustrated and impatient when things don't go so as fast as I want it to be. But you have to keep in mind that this is a marathon. Everything about this process of developing and bringing a product to market is long term. It's a marathon. It is not a sprint. And you're just going to end up driving yourself a little bit crazy if you are constantly pushing, trying to make things faster, expedited shipping. I'm going to pay, double shipping costs to save 2 days. And I got to push my engineer or, constantly pushing things. You may speed things up a little bit, but ultimately you can only do so much, and you're just going to kind of drive yourself a bit crazy if you try to push things too hard. So I just wanted to comment on that briefly. As far as when people will take you more seriously, well, the basic answer is once you've made some real progress. So whether you have a prototype or some real customer validation, either of those are going to cause people to take you more seriously. And I know it can be, there's a lot of work and steps and money to get a custom prototype, but even if you just have a proof of concept prototype and maybe some field testing with various customers, then you'll be taken more seriously. Because, and this is something I talk about all the time, is the value isn't not in the idea. The value is in the execution of that idea. So everyone's got ideas, lots of ideas out there, but very few of them are executed on. So if you want to differentiate yourself and you want to be taken seriously, then you have to do some of the work. You have to execute on the idea and show that people that you have what it takes to actually execute and make this a reality. And you're not just someone that sits around in dreams but never really acts on those dreams or does what's required. As far as co-founder and terms or agreements, in most cases I would say that you want to do a 50-50 equity split, because you want them to be equally motivated, equally invested in the company and the success as you are. And if you just give them a 5% cut and you're getting 95%, well, that's just going to cause resentment, and they're not going to be equally motivated as you are. I mean, they're 5% and you're 95%. That's just not going to motivate them as much. And especially if they come in early. If you're really early, you just have a proof of concept, or you're not much further along. Then you're probably going to give them a 50-50 split. If you're further along, you've made tons of progress, you've got customers lined up, you've got manufacturing set up, and then you want to bring on a co-founder to help with, marketing or sales, then in that case, maybe not 50-50, because you've de-risked it a lot by making all of this progress for them. So I don't think they deserve 50% of the equity if you've already done so much of the upfront work and taken on all the risk yourself. I mean, the more risk you take on, the more upside potential you should get, right? So that's my thought on that. So, overall, just make as much progress as you can on your own. And maybe this is a prototype if you're technical, or maybe it's customer relationships, or maybe at least some detailed developmental analysis. Maybe you analyze the development cost and manufacturing cost. Just, you have to show that you've done some upfront work. And from my own story, this is what I did. I got my product to, it was a little bit beyond a proof of concept prototype, because it kind of looked like the final one, but it wasn't ready for mass manufacturing, and it was still 3D printed. But I was able to get a retailer interested in a big customer. It was Blockbuster Video at the time. Assuming you've probably heard of them, but obviously I'm dating myself here a bit. This was quite a while ago when I brought my product to market, but getting Blockbuster Video interested in my product and expressing that interest, then everyone took me seriously. After that, I was able to get a manufacturer interested, and they partnered with me and invested over $100,000 in my project. And I was able to then still leverage my Blockbuster success and build a team of 20 sales representatives. So I'm pitching my product to retailers all across the country and in other countries as well. And I don't think that would have ever happened if I didn't have that initial progress that I had made on my own. I had a prototype and I had customer interest. It's like there was still a lot of work to do and still a decent amount of risk, but I had been the one that took on most of the upfront risk. So after that, it was much easier to get other people interested and to take me seriously. As far as finding co-founders, it's really just all about networking. You need to meet other people. There are websites out there where you can match up with co-founders, but in general, you just need to focus on networking. And ideally, not networking with plumbers, for instance. You need to network with people that are in the same industry or that are in product development or startups, that type of thing. So local meetups can be a great way to meet potential co-founders. Universities are a fantastic source for technical and non-technical co-founders. LinkedIn is another. That's my favorite, obviously the most popular networking platform for business, at least. And they have a great feature on there. I don't know if you know, where if you have someone in your network that and you see that they have someone in their network that they know that you'd like to meet up with, and you can ask your connection to do an introduction. There's an option for doing that in LinkedIn, and introduce you to someone in their network. And that's typically much better than you reaching out to that person cold and just saying, hey, you want to work with me? So if you can get an introduction through LinkedIn, that's great. Another way is, like, for instance, in my Hardware Academy program, we do one-to-one matchups between members. So you can register for these, and then every couple weeks, or you can do any frequency that you want, you get automatically matched up with another member that's got some similarities, either project or skills or location as you, and then you just do a one-to-one video call. And this has been really great for helping to foster various relationships. I know some people have gotten investments, others have found co-founders using this. So ultimately, it comes to, you just have to put yourself out there, and it's going to be common. You're going to find that in a lot of times throughout this entire process. You're going to have to go outside your comfort zone, I suspect, for a lot of you. And, in the end, finding a co-founder, it's just like everything else in this process. It's a slow process that you just cannot rush. You need to think of this over the long term, and you definitely don't want to. Most of the time you rush, you make mistakes, you make bad decisions. And one bad decision you do not want to make is locking yourself in with a bad co-founder. Man, that's like really, that can be really a bad situation. So you need to think of it as a marriage. This is someone you're going to dedicate, probably not your life like marriage, but definitely at least years and potentially your life if your company is a big success. So just keep that in mind. Think the long term, and that's going to serve you well. Okay, I hope I answered all of your questions, Chris. Thank you so much. That was another great question. Okay, I think we're coming up around the 40-minute mark. I'm not really keeping track of time too much, but I wanted to keep this around 30 to 40 minutes. So these were only 3 questions, but they were really in-depth questions. So I think I'm going to stop it here. If anyone has any questions for me, obviously, if you're a member of my academy, you can just ask there and I'll answer. You'll get answers right away, or you can ask in the comments section of this video, and I'll either answer your question in the comment section, or I'll save it and add it to the queue of questions for one of these Q&A sessions. Okay, I hope this has been helpful, and it's been great hanging out with you. I hope you've enjoyed hanging out with me. And yeah, I'm John Teal with Predictable Designs, and I hope you have a great day. Thanks so much.